all the geometry gemaras, and what we came out with was this interesting halacha that in order to have a kosher sukkah, if you have a round sukkah, so how do you calculate? How do you measure it? What's the measurement of a sukkah when it's round? We know if it's square. I mean, our Gemara talked about a measurement of dalid amos, 4 cubits by 4 cubits, but we don't paskin that way. We hold a sukkah needs to be 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. Our Gemara was following a certain view that went by the 4 cubit by 4 cubit rule. And on that view, it talked about what happens if the sukkah is round. And then the Gemara said that it gave a calculation of 24 people being around the sukkah. That's how big the sukkah needs to be. Then we calculated if a sukkah that's surround, if it's round around the 24 people. In other words, the 24 people are the actual circumference, or is the circumference of the sukkah really is it really the in between the if you have 24 people standing, so it would be the circle that is inside them. That circle would be the circle of the sukkah, and ultimately that's what we concluded, that would be the measurement, the actual measurement of such a sukkah, calculated to calculate to 16. What it calculate to? Excuse me. It calculated would be a 6.
They didn't have the 3.14 multiplication, right?
Well, right. They used a 3, a 1 to 3
okay,
calculation,
that's close. Yeah.
which is the rounding off to the nearest number. So the Gemara said that really it should be 16.8. That would be the actual size of a 4 cubit sukkah, would be 16 cubits, 16.8 circumference of cubits, 16.8 cubits. That should be the correct amount. But the Gemara concluded that the calculation of 24 was really came to, what did it come to? It came to Tmanisri, came to 18. And the question was, so why did Rabbi Yochanan use this calculation of 18 when really 16.8 should have been enough? And the answer was that he wasn't exact. He could have said 16.8, but it's not a rounded off number. He could have said 17, but if he said 17, what would be the diameter of this circle? So if he said 17, it won't be a solid number. The diameter won't be a solid number, because the diameter would be a third of 17. A third of 17. So if you divide 17 into 3, you don't get a solid number. So therefore he picked the number 18. And if you pick the number 18, you have a solid diameter, which is 6. So 6 cubits. A diameter equals an 18 cubit sukkah, round sukkah. And even though according to halacha, really a 16.8 sukkah would be kosher, but he picked the most easiest diameter, a solid number, which is the closest solid number to his calculation. 16.8, what would be the closest diameter to that? 6, diameter of 6. So if he said 5, that would be too low, because diameter of 5 would only give him a sukkah that's 15, that would be 15 cubits circumference. And that would be too small of a sukkah, according to the opinion that you need dalid amos for a square sukkah. So that opinion would hold you need 16.8 amos cubits, 16.8 cubits for a round sukkah. And if you said a diameter of 5, that would mean that it's basically a 15 cubit sukkah, cubit circle, which would not be big enough. So therefore, he said a diameter of 6, which ends up being 18 cubits of a circumference. Really, you could get away with less, but he rounded it off to that number. So that's called the rounded off number is 18. 16.8 is rounded off to 18. So now the trick question is, how can you say that 16.8, rounding it off to solid number is 18? It should be 17. That's the question. And the answer
but it's not going to be too small at 18.
No, 17 would be rounding it off, and it wouldn't be too small, because 16.8 would be large enough. So why would we round it off to 18 when 16.8 would be good enough? You could have rounded it off to 17. And the answer is that we're looking at the diameter. You look at the diameter and you want to round off the diameter, that's when you have to round it off to 18, because what you're really rounding off is the diameter. Instead of it being 5 and a fraction, you round it off to 6. So when you say it's 18 cubits circumference, what you're really saying is it's a 6 cubit circumference, a diameter, excuse me, 6 cubit diameter. And so you rounded it off from a 5 and a percentage of a diameter instead to 6 diameter. So 6 diameter equals 18. So that's how you're rounding it off. That's how it works. So you rounded it off to the nearest diameter solid number. So that was the conclusion. Now, if you take that into halacha, how does this work? We hold that a sukkah needs to be 7 cubits, 7 handbreadths. If a sukkah needs to be 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths square, what would happen if you made a round sukkah? So if you made a round sukkah, now we had an opinion, of course, that a round sukkah is not kosher. A shoivach, you make it like a shoivach, it's not kosher. But the seeming understanding is that we don't follow that, because Rabbi Yochanan clearly said a round sukkah is okay. So the opinion of Acherim seems to not fly in halacha. It doesn't seem to be the halacha that a sukkah made like a shoivach, he says, is puzzle. We had that on page 7b, that a sukkah made like a shoivach, a dovecoat, would be puzzle, invalid. That was the opinion of Acherim. Acherim is another name for a mayor. But we don't follow that view in halacha, and really a sukkah that's made round is kosher, as we see Rabbi Yochanan seems to hold that way clearly. He says a kivshon, if it has 24, can handle 24 people, it's kosher. And we calculated that, and we said that means 24 people around the circle, which the circle would be 18 cubits. And that was the case that we just explained. So a round sukkah is kosher. We don't hold like Rabbi Yochanan at his measurement. Rabbi Yochanan was following the measurement of Rebbe, that a sukkah needs to be 4 cubits by 4 cubits. So we hold that sukkah could be 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. So how round, what would the round circumference be for a sukkah if we want to make a kosher round sukkah? You know, some people like to do things that are a little off the beaten path. So imagine you made a round sukkah and you want to like get people to question it, and to look at it, and to be surprised and go tell their rabbi, and So imagine you make a round sukkah. What would the minimum size be if you wanted to do this, make a round sukkah? So the way our Gemara explained it is you need to be able to fit in your sukkah a 7 by 7 sukkah. You don't have to have the 7 by 7 sukkah. You're in a circle sukkah. You don't have to build over there a square, but you have to fit inside your circle a square that's 7 cubits, 7 handbreadths, 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. You need to be able to fit that. So how big would that sukkah actually be if the circumference of that circle? So let's think about it. 7 handbreadths. In order to figure out what the circle around a square, a 7 handbreadth by 7 handbreadth square, what you would need to do is find what the hypotenuse of that square is. So 7 times 1.4, just pull up my calculator here. So you have 7 times
9.8.
7 times 1.4 equals 9.8. Thank you, Ezra. So you have 9.8. Was that without a calculator you figured that out?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we got 9.8. That's the hypotenuse of that square. And that would also be the diameter of a circle around the square. That would be the diameter. So 9.8 times 3. And that equals 29.4. 29 and 4/10, or if you want a fraction, it's 29 and 2/5 handbreadths. Now, assuming that a handbreadth is 9 inches, so that would be, you multiply that by 9 times 9, it would equal 264.6. No, not 9. I'm sorry, 3. Right, you're right. I'm sorry. What did I just do? Let me redo that again. 7 times 1.4 equals 9.8 times 3 equals 29.4. And then every hand breadth is 3 inches. So let's multiply that by 3 times 3 equals 88.2. So a sukkah could be a circle with a circumference of 88.2 inches approximately. Maybe give a few extra inches just because I don't know the exact measurement. I think 3 inches is according to all opinions, but I'm not 100%. I have to look it up and make sure if it's 3.1 or 3 point something. So anyway, it's approximately 88 inches and maybe 90. Let's round it off to 90 inches. So a 90-inch circle should be a kosher sukkah. Now, the problem with this is that something that I mentioned, and that is that our calculation, Ben brought it up, our calculation is a little off because the circle around the diameter is not really 3 times the diameter. It's really 3.14, and even that is not so exact. It's a little more than that, right? So if I'm calculating this and I'm not really doing an exact calculation, because the real calculation is pi, which is a number that you can't really, we can't really calculate it exactly. But we're going much below that number because we're rounding it off to 3 instead of 3.14. Now, we're also doing the same mistake with the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse, we're multiplying the measurement of the square, at least one of the one row of the square, multiplying it times 1.4, and that's how we're getting the hypotenuse. That's also a little off. That's not exact. So how can we be comfortable haskening about a circle sukkah that we know is a little off? We know that our calculation is not exact. So the thing is that the Chachamim haskin, the Chachamim told us, the rabbis have told us that when it comes to the measurement of a circle, you're allowed to rely on the 1-to-3 ratio. Meaning the rabbis know that it's off, but the rabbis have some type of tradition. It must be like a halacha l'meisha misinai shiurim. We know the measurements are halacha l'meisha misinai, so probably this is included in that. That the halacha l'meisha misinai is that we, as humans, are allowed to rely on the rounded off amount that the rabbis understood, which is 1-to-3, the ratio of the circumference of a circle compared to the diameter of the circle. And even though we all know that it's off, but nevertheless, because the Torah was given to humans and we are not able to calculate exactly the exact number, and therefore the Torah, the halacha l'meisha misinai is that's our calculation is based on that, meaning that Hashem's ratzah and Hashem's will is that a sukkah has to be as big as that circle, which would be 3 times the diameter, and ultimately it would be somewhere around 90 inches, which we know is not exact to have 7 by 7. It's not the exact amount, but we also know that that's acceptable. That's what Hashem wants. That's the number. That's the calculation. That is according to halacha the final number. So the point is that our calculation, and this is what we've seen, is that the Gemara seems to follow this 1-to-3 ratio, and also with the hypotenuse 1.4. That is the accepted in halacha, even though the rabbis of the Talmud knew very well exactly how much it's off. Yes, David.
There's a diagram in Steinsaltz, and I'm not sure how it fits in with what you're saying or what it is. Can I share the diagram?
Okay, we can check it out. I don't know if I'll understand it, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that has to do with okay. Well, you could stop sharing it. That
Okay.
has to do with Tosfos, and it has to do with the fact that when you have a hypotenuse, the difference between 49 and 50, something about a square root, which is the square root. So I'm sure Ezra or maybe probably Mordechai could help us over here exactly. Mordechai, are you familiar with that diagram? It has to do with the 49 being the square root. When you have a square root, you somehow can't have a fraction. You cannot have a decimal. Can't explain a square root. So Taisus over there proves that the hypotenuse that it can't be 1.4 is a little off, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if Mordechai understands that or Ezra. That's basically what that's saying. Is basically what I was explaining, except that
so 7 times 7 is 49. That's close enough to 50.
It's close.
Rounded off, they say
right,
50.
Right. Anyway, so something along those lines. Again,
It's
if I was,
bringing from the wording from the Gemara that we're learning, and it's called a ribua ba'alaxon.
Yeah, that's in English. That's the hypotenuse.
The square and its diagonal.
The hypotenuse of the square, which is like that line going from the top to the bottom.
They're not taking it from corner to corner. They're taking it from the middle to the middle.
So anyway, so the Gemara continues.
Opposite, the right angle is the hypotenuse. That's how you define the hypotenuse. It's the line opposite the right angle. So whatever you said there in Hebrew with revere, the right, whatever, and the other line makes sense.
In the Aramaic, it's called the alachsoin. Okay, so anyway, the Gemara on Ches Amud Beis on 8b, it brought down the statement of Reb Levi Mishum Reb Meir, that Reb Levi in the name of Reb Meir talked about a sukkah of the potters, of the two sukkahs that they would build, the potters would have two types of structures, one within the other. And the question was, do either of them need a mezuzah, or either of them kosher for a sukkah? And the Gemara explained that the one that's going to be kosher for a sukkah is not going to need a mezuzah, and the one that's going to be non-kosher for a sukkah is going to need a mezuzah. And basically, the middle one, the inner one, I should say, the inner one is the one that the potter, I mean, it's a little unclear because it does say that the potter lives there. And Rashi even uses the term all year round lives there, which is interesting, and you'll soon see why. He lives there all year round, and he does much of his majority of his dealings of his things are there, his eating, his sleeping, roiv tashmishay. Majority of his personal things are there, personal matters. And then the outer room is used for like selling, presenting his pots, his
showroom.
Showroom. So that's the outer room. Thank you. So that's the outer room. So we've got an outer room and an inner room. Now, the Gemara says, Reb Levi in the name of Reb Meir, that says the pnimius, this inner room, is not good for a sukkah. And Rashi explains the problem. What's the problem? Problem is he lives there year round. You live there year round, this is not considered it doesn't look like it's not minkar. The term is that it's not recognizable that it's a sukkah it's meant for a sukkah. It looks like it's a dwelling. And
it wasn't built for the correct
It doesn't look, it's loy minkara. This is the term he uses, loy minkara milsa. It's not recognizable that it's for the sukkah, for a sukkah, that it's made for a sukkah, that l'shem sukkah he's dwelling in. The problem with that line is that Rashi himself asks it on himself. He says, yes, it's not recognizable that it's built for a sukkah, but Beis Hillel holds you don't need it to be built for a sukkah. You could build a hut you didn't have in mind for a sukkah, it's kosher. So why over here is this a problem? The Pneumius, the Gemara is telling us, Levi in the name of Meir is going to say it's not a sukkah, it's not kosher. And the reason, not recognized, you live it year round. You live in it year round.
If you're sitting in the guy's living room and you know it's sukkahs, and you pull out, a hamburger and say, let's eat, and the guy says, where's your sukkah? And you take a bite. Oh, I'm in it. It's kosher. It's just nothing separating your day-to-day life or work from it being yontif. That's all.
Correct. The only question is, so what specific law does this fall under that ruins it? So the way Rashi understands it, it's a rabbinic law. Biblically, your schach, we're understanding that it has kosher schach. The roof is a kosher roof, whatever you used the potter uses. I don't know how they could get away with that. It means it would rain in, seemingly. I don't know if that ruins pottery, but if water gets on it, but somehow their roof was maybe they didn't have any other option. Maybe there was no other way. Maybe it's an area where it doesn't rain so much. However you learn it, they had a kosher schach, but still the sukkah is not going to be a kosher sukkah. And the reason is because they live there year round. And because they live there, it's used, this is not, it doesn't look like it's for a sukkah. So the question that Rashi asks on himself is, but it doesn't need to be made for a sukkah. It could be you could build it without any specific intention in mind. It's kosher. So what makes this worse?
It's not a question of lishma. The other way is you didn't think of it as you're making it as a sukkah. The other one, the problem now is how it looks from the outside, not how it is from the inside.
So Rashi answers, good point, Isaac. Rashi just says that it doesn't have to be made for a sukkah, so that's not a problem, because we hold like Beis Hillel, that even if you just built this hut without having in mind sukkah just to be a shade, it would be good enough. But here, the problem is that it's not recognizable that you're living in it l'shem sukkah because you're dwelling in it for a sukkah, because really you dwell in it always. It's nothing different. There's nothing different about how you're dwelling. So seemingly, this is what Isaac is getting at, that even though the theoretically the way it's made is not a problem, but it's the fact that you're used to dwelling in this type of sukkah, that's what ruins this from being a kosher option for you during sukkahs, which means that biblically it's a kosher sukkah. It doesn't have to be made for the sake of sukkahs, which it wasn't. It was made for your year-round dwelling and shade and so on, but not for sukkahs. It doesn't need to be according to Beis Hillel. But the problem is you live in it year-round, so the rabbis prohibited this as being a kosher from being a kosher sukkah. Now, but it would be obligated in a mezuzah because you dwell in it. The outer room, on the other hand, you don't dwell in. The outer room is like your showroom. So that room, it would be kosher for a sukkah because you don't normally dwell in it. And because you don't year-round, you don't dwell in it. So now you're dwelling in it. That's good enough of a difference between the way you're using it year-round and the way you're using it on sukkahs. And therefore, it would be kosher for a sukkah. So that's the two rooms. One is kosher, one is not kosher. Now, what about a mezuzah for the outer room? So the Gemara says that the outer room is exempt from a mezuzah because you don't use it for dwelling. You use it as a doorway to get out, as a room, as a corridor to get out, and bring stuff in, and you maybe use it. You use it as your showroom, but and Rashi says you also do some work there. You do. You work, maybe you make your vessels over there, and you show them to sell. You bring them out there to sell, so it's your showroom. So basically, this outer room is not dwelled in. So it's putter from a mezuzah, it's exempt from a mezuzah. Now, the problem is, Gemara says, but even a room that's used as a corridor to get into, like maybe if you have some type of the Hebrew term is a beis shar, like a room, the entrance room, a lobby type of room before you, or you have some type of an entranceway that you go into, and then you get into the house. That room would be obligated in a mezuzah. It's called a beis shar. So if a beis shar is obligated in a mezuzah, and Rashi tells us that it's obligated rabbinically, midrabanan, so seemingly the outer room of the potter should also be obligated midrabanan in a mezuzah. And the statement from Reb Levi in the name of Reb Meir said that it's exempt from a mezuzah. So that seems to be a contradiction from this Gemara elsewhere, where it talks about a beis shar that's obligated in a mezuzah, even though it's only a beis shar. It's not a room you live in. It's an entranceway room that you're entering in order to get into the house. And that room is obligated in a mezuzah, at least midrabanan, rabbinically. So that seemingly should be similar to this case of a potter's outer room, that they should be obligated as well in a mezuzah in the outer room. And the Gemara answers, and this is where it really knocks us off a little, and that is that it's mishum deloy kaviyah. It's not permanent. And Rashi tells us not this and not that. What he means is neither rooms are really permanent. And because they're not permanent, so therefore the inner room, which is obligated in a mezuzah, is not going to be given the jurisdiction of being able to have a room called an entrance to it. It won't have that criteria of being an official room that's able to obligate a entranceway room to be obligated in a mezuzah. So the beis shar of such a place, of a potter's inner room, is not going to be obligated in a mezuzah, because the inner room itself, it's not really a kaviyah. It's not so permanent. Now, what does it mean it's not permanent? I mean, he seems to live in it year round. So some of the commentaries want to say that really he doesn't live in it year round. Only sometimes he sleeps in it, but he has a house elsewhere. Rashi used the term that majority of his stuff he does there, and his sleeping is there. So, so the way maybe you could learn in Rashi is, I mean, he starts off, Rashi says, all the days of the year, kol yomais hashana, dayer hasam, he lives there. In the majority of his things, and his eating and his sleeping is there. So he lives there all year round. The majority of his things, and even his sleep, is there. So what does that mean? Does that mean that he's only there majority, and there's a nice sized minority that he's not there? Maybe that's why it's not called a permanent dwelling. It's built, maybe the way it's built is not built to be so permanent. And therefore, we're not going to give it an entranceway. So some of the commentaries, again, want to say that he only sleeps there seldomly, you know, there's certain, he's there late, so he'll sleep there. Okay, so maybe that would be why it's not so permanent. And it is a sukkah. I mean, obviously, I guess it's definitely not so solid. It's a sukkah dwelling. There is also a understanding that maybe he only dwells there in the summer, not in the winter, which actually makes sense, that he would only dwell there in the summer where there was no rain. So that could be an understanding here, because the Mishnah in Maasros talks about this idea that you could have a potter's room that he dwells in only in the summer, not in the winter. And I guess it makes sense because of the rain. I would think it would ruin the pottery if rain gets to it before it's baked, before it's heated in the kiln. I would think that would make it too watery and ruin it, maybe, or ruin the design. I don't know. But anyway, so that might be the idea, that it's not really a dwelling. It doesn't seem to be a solid dwelling. It's a semi. It's somewhere in the middle. And
Rebbe,
therefore, yes,
he's a worker who sleeps there when he needs to and can.
that's one shot.
True.
Yeah.
And if it's raining, you're not going to. So you're working late, you stay over there and sleep there ready for the night, but only if it's realistic.
Right. Okay. So the thing is, one of the commentaries says, like you're saying, that he would sleep there when he needs to. But Rashi seems to make it a little more permanent than that. Rashi seems to say, he starts off saying all year round, which to me knocks off that understanding that there's a difference between the summer and the winter, because Rashi says that all year round, Dyer Husam, wells there, and then he says majorities, the majority. So in Rashi itself, it seems a little unclear. Does he have another house, or he doesn't have another house?
Rebbe, for a couple of years, I worked on 47th Street.
You sometimes slept in your office.
And diamond guys who cut diamonds.
Uh-huh.
What they do is they sit at a wheel that is spinning like a turntable, record turntable, spinning very fast, that has diamond dust on it. And then they take the stone in question and they press down against that as it's filing away. Whatever it is, you have to know all the details. The point is, it's not like today where you can do it at home. These are very calibrated tables and everything else. So you got to be there. And these guys were never so poor. Mamish, they'd sleep there, they'd be there, they'd daven there.
Right.
They went home for Shabbos. That was good.
Right. Understood. But anyway, the bottom line is that this is somewhere in between a dwelling and a house. Right. And so we're going to give it a mezuzah. We're going to obligate it in a mezuzah. We're not going to allow it to be used as a sukkah. But we are not going to give it an extra room that's sort of like an entranceway room that would normally be obligated in a mezuzah. For this type of house, we don't consider it that way. And that's the conclusion of this Gemara about the Sukkahs Hayoisrim, the Sukkah for the potters. So that was the Gemara we learned on Friday. And now we're up to the next Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis taught in a brisa. So we're going to start here. We're on page 8b. And we are by the, by about 8 lines down from the top of the page. And if you have an art scroll, it is 8b1. Tanu Rabbanon, the second column, 8b1. So the Gemara says as follows. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught in a brisa. Ganvach. Ganvach is this abbreviation of Goyim, Noshim, Behema, and Kutim. 4 types of sukkahs. And the acronym for it is Ganvach. Sukkahs Goyim, the first one is the Gimel, Goyim. That is a sukkah that the Goyim built for themselves to dwell in it. Sukkahs Noshim, a sukkah that women built in order to dwell in. And Sukkahs Behema, a sukkah made for the animals. Could be that it also means a sukkah that the animals made. And the Sukkahs Kusim, a sukkah made by these Kusim, who we were talking about, that they were exiled to Eretz Yisrael when the 10 tribes were taken away from Eretz Yisrael. So they brought people from this country called which was I think it's Ethiopia. But anyway, they were brought there in order to fill. Is that the? So they were brought there in order to populate the place a little, and problem was that they were brought to Eretz Yisrael, and there were lions that would swallow them up, eat them up, and kill them. And they realized it must be because they're not following the religion of the land. So many of them convert. So they all converted. And the question was, did they convert according to Jewish law? Was it a kosher conversion or not? Did they really accept the mitzvahs? Did they just do this conversion because of the lions, and they didn't really have a lev shalem, a complete heart to convert? Did they really accept the mitzvahs, or they didn't? Did they really sincerely want to become Jewish or not? So the thing is, so they made this sukkah. Now, according to the assumption of this brisa, which is an argument throughout the whole Mishnah and the brisas, always a question. There's a question throughout the Mishnayos, who is this Mishnah following? So we're following the opinion that the Kutim converted inappropriately. It was not a kosher conversion. So that's the sukkah, but they made a sukkah. They want to dwell in this hut. And then so these are, so far we've got Goyim, Nashim, Behema, Kutim. We've got 4 cases of sukkahs. And these are all people who are not obligated, or animals that are not obligated in a sukkah. Women are exempt from a sukkah. Of course, they can fulfill the mitzvah if they want to, but they're exempt. And of course, Goyim are exempt, animals are exempt. And the Kutim, according to this opinion, we're considering them exempt from the sukkah because they are not real Jewish converts. They might have the paper, they might have the document that says that they're Jewish, but it's actually worthless, not worth more than a piece of paper. And at least that's the opinion that the brisa is following. And then the brisa says sukkah mikol makayim, and also if you have a simple sukkah, which the Gemara will soon explain what that refers to, a sukkah mikol makayim, any like simple sukkah. So it says ksheira, such a sukkah is kosher, as long as it has a schach according to halacha. So these are basically cases that the sukkah was not built by someone who is obligated in it. And the brisa tells us it's kosher. Now, you have to always think about this compared to another law. We have a law that women cannot write Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzahs. And the reason they can't write them is because they're not obligated in them. And if you're obligated in the kshira and tying it, then you can do the ksiva, then you can do the writing. And the question, of course, is, does that apply to other mitzvahs? Like if they're not obligated, would they be allowed to build it, make it? One of the questions would be, what about a tzitzis? Could a woman tie tzitzis? Seems to be a big debate. Anyway, this would get into this question over here. Our Gemara is talking about a sukkah made by women, and the thing is, they're not obligated. It's just like they're not obligated in tefillin and mezuzahs. Sefer Torah, they're not obligated. So would they be allowed to write them? Of course, it would bring down the prices a little, probably.
What about a ksuba?
Well, ksuba is not, ksuba could be printed.
A woman who writes a ksuba.
Yeah, but a ksuba doesn't have to be written. It's not a halachic. It's a legal document. A ksuba. It's not a Torah. It's not a holy document. It's not a document of holiness that's an obligation, to write. You have to have it. So it could be printed. The ksuba could be printed. There's no difference if a woman writes it or an animal wrote it, or even if the ink spilled and it wrote a ksuba, it would still be kosher. Let's say your ink spilled from your shelf and it fell down and it wrote a ksuba. That would be a kosher ksuba. Yes, Ben.
So you cannot have a sukkah built for you by your help.
So that's what our Gemara is talking about. So when it comes to mezuzah or tefillin, that's another story. But here the Brisa tells us kshera. The Brisa says it's kosher. We'll have to see how that applies, how that's applied in halacha, but that's what it says here. Yes, Ruvain.
Rabbi, under the women making the tzitzis, is that for a talus for Shabbos, or is that the tzitzis as a garment?
It would seem to apply to both. Be the same thing.
Interesting.
Difference.
So, what do you say, Isaac? There's no
I said,
difference?
what's the difference? I'm trying to understand the distinction
The
between
difference
tzitzis and the
is
talus.
a talus, you can't go to the bathroom with it, but you can go to the bathroom with your tzitzis on.
You can go to the bathroom with your talus. What are you talking about?
No way.
Of your shul, maybe not. La halacha, you can.
Oh, I don't know about that, Isaac.
I don't know. We don't go.
So I learned, and believe me, Rabbi Smith would have corrected me 3 times in the time you and I spoke if I was wrong.
So,
I don't want to get into it.
we did learn about it in brachas a little. We had a situation where you'd be allowed to wrap
If you're outside, chas v'shalom, and you get an emergency, you have to go. You can go.
Yeah, we spoke about wrapping your tefillin even with your talus.
Talus or tzitzis. It's the same thing.
Anyway,
I
bottom
thought
line.
there the issue was that if you don't go with it, maybe it'll be stolen if you put it on the wall or you know.
Right. There definitely were situations where we needed to find leniency. Anyway, the bottom line is that you shouldn't take your talus into the bathroom. But is it prohibited?
No.
I don't believe so. I believe.
But if you did, you can make an asher yosar afterwards.
But anyway, just like we don't take the kittel even in the bathroom because it's used for davening. So seemingly the same thing would be
The gato.
or a talus. What is that?
The gato.
And the gartel as well, right? It's used for davening, right? Correct. Thank you. Yeah, good point. But al pi halacha, I don't know if you can say that it's a problem, especially also because our bathrooms are also not necessarily considered bathrooms in addition to all the other
American bathrooms.
Right. So in any event, getting back to our Gemara. So we're talking about these sukkahs made from people that are exempt. What I brought up to you is that there is discussion in the commentaries of how do you differentiate between the laws of sukkah and the laws of like writing a sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzah, which is brought by the Rebbe Akiva Eger on the side, the Gilyon Hashas. He doesn't tell you his question, but he just touches on it. He just quotes you the Gemara Gittin, and so on. But bottom line is that these are issues that are discussed at length in the commentaries. Anyway, for our Gemara's purposes, it does seem to say that a woman, even though she's exempt from a sukkah, she would be allowed, or at least it would be acceptable if she built your sukkah. It would be kosher, as long as it was mesuchach kehilchaso. Now, what does that mean? As long as it has schach according to halacha. So the Gemara says, "My kehilchaso." What does this mean? That it's mesuchach kehilchaso. It has proper schach. Rashi adds in an interesting point. Rashi says, it obviously does not mean that it has majority schach. It has majority shade than sunlight. That can't be the meaning of mesuchach kehilchasa. He says, because what do you think? Because a woman made it, you could be more lenient? Would there be any thought that would make it better? the woman making it should make it more, is more of a problem. So you think, well, she made it. Now we're going to allow you to have it. Doesn't have to have the schach. Of course, it needs to have the schach. That's obvious. So what are we adding over here? That it has to be mesuchach kehilchasa. Now, you think the fact that it was made not for a sukkah, it was made for a woman to use for her purposes, that she wants to enjoy it in the summer. She wants to have a sukkah, so that's going to make it more exempt, that it doesn't need to have the proper amount of schach. That can't be the meaning. So what does it mean, kehilchasa? So Amar Rav Chisda says, v'hu she'asa l'tzel, that the intent that she has to have is not that it's made for a sukkah, because she didn't have in mind for sukkahs. Neither did the goyim have in mind for sukkahs. They're building it for themselves. Neither, of course, the animals didn't have in mind for sukkahs. But the main thing is that it was made for tzel, for shade. That was the purpose of making it, and that is considered, as long as it's made for shade, then it's considered a sukkah. So that's the halacha, that it has to be made for the purpose of giving shade. So the Gemara says, what is this case that we mentioned, a sukkah mikol makam? That a sukkah mikol makam, a simple sukkah, however it is also kosher. What was that? What is that referring to? So Gemara says that's lasuye mai. What is it adding? Lasuye sukkas rakbash. It's adding the sukkahs that are included in this acronym called rakbash. What are the sukkahs that are part of these, that are included in this acronym rakbash? So there's the reish is for royim, shepherds, that they sort of have a guard room that they use. They use some type of guard hut, and that's for the shepherds. Then there's the kuf, rakbash. Second letter kuf is for kayotzim. Kayotz is the dried. They would dry out the figs, and so they would they would watch these dried. They would watch them, make sure no one steals them or animal, whatever. There would be a guard house for the or a guard hut for the security, for the watchers of the figs that are being left to dry. And then there's the burganin. The burganin is the rakbash. The third letter is base for burganin, is the sukkah for the security people of the city, of the town. And the final letter is shoimrei peiros. They would watch the vineyards, the gardens. So this was a sukkah for the watchmen of the farms. So these type of huts, they were meant, and they were built, I should say, they were built by Yidden, but they are not built for sukkahs. They're built for year-round, the guarding, whatever necessity they were, whatever thing they were guarding. And that's the rakbash, that these sukkahs, so it's a little different than the other cases. The other cases were built by non-Jews or by people who are not obligated. So the rakbash sukkahs are built by people who are obligated in sukkah, but they're not built for sukkah. And then, so now the brisa, let's read it inside. Sukkahs rakbash, the tanu rabbanon, because the rabbis taught in a brisa. Sukkahs rakbash, the sukkahs of this acronym rakbash, is sukkahs royim, the sukkah of these shepherds, that they would get nice and hot out there, so they would cool off in these huts. So there was a sukkah made for them. Sukkahs kayotzim, the sukkah of the guards, of the watchmen of the figs, the figs that are drying out. Sukkahs borganin, the city security watch houses. The sukkahs shoymei peiros, the sukkahs of the watchmen of the fruits, of the vineyards, of the gardens. All of these, and a sukkah mikol makim, and also a simple sukkah, or sukkah, however it is. That all these 5 cases are kshera. The sukkahs are kosher. As long as it has schach as halacha demands and my kihel chasa. So what does it mean in this brisa where it talks about rakbash, that the sukkah needs to be kihel chasa? Rav Chizda. So here we have Rav Chizda, v'hu shasa letzel. It has to be made for shade. So in other words, the goal, the purpose, the mission of building a sukkah doesn't have to be for sukkahs, because we hold like Beis Hillel that you don't need a sukkah lishma. It doesn't have to be made for the intent of having a kosher sukkah. But what you do need is that it should be made for shade. That's the goal. That's the purpose of your sukkah. Now, all of these sukkahs are made for, as long as they're made for shade, they're considered kosher. So the Gemara says, and what's this sukkah mikol makayim? In the brisa of Rakbash, it uses that same term, a sukkah mikol makayim. Also a simple sukkah, however it's made, that's also kashera, it's also kosher. La suye mai, what is that? Adding la suye sukkahs ganbach to include the other brisa's sukkahs. So one brisa taught ganbach and it added Rakbash sukkahs, and the other brisa talked about Rakbash sukkahs and it adds ganbach sukkahs. So basically, we've got 8 sukkahs that are going to be kosher now. We've just learned about 8 kosher sukkahs, Rakbash and Ganbach. The one that says Ganbach, he adds a word in his brisa about sukkah mikol makay, and that's to add also the Rakbash sukkahs. And the brisa that talks about Rakbash sukkahs adds the word sukkah mikol makay to include the Ganbach sukkah. So we got all 8. Basically, we've just learned that all of these 8 are going to be kosher, and they're basically taught to us in 2 different brises. And we also learned that however you make it, you have to do it l'shem tzel. It has to be for shade. The sukkah needs to be made with the intent of giving shade, and that's why it's going to be a kosher sukkah. Hi, Tana. So, Hi, Tana de Ganbach. This Tana, that first Tana, that taught the brisa of the Ganbach sukkahs, Alima le Ganbach. The sukkahs of Ganbach are more logical to be kosher, mishum dekviyi, because they are established, they're meant to last longer. Vikatana, and therefore the brisa says not only are these kosher, but also a sukkah mikol makoim, a sukkah that's not as good as these, is also going to be kosher. And the Tana says mikol makom la suye rakbash, to include that also the rakbash sukkahs are also going to be kosher. Delay kaviyi, that they're not as much as established, that they're going to last as long as these initial sukkahs, the ganbach sukkahs, last a long time. The others are not meant to last as long. And the reason is because they seem to move them around, go other places. They're not always in the same place. So they take it down and they to like a mobile, they rebuild it. So even those are going to be kosher, even the rakbash sukkahs that are not permanent, that are not as permanent. The high Tana de Rakbash, and so the brisa, the second brisa of Rakbash, Alima le Rakbash. Why does he considers the Rakbash sukkahs, which was those sukkah that's meant for the royim, the kayotzim, the shepherds, the people who watch the figs and the watch of the town and watch the vineyards. Why would that sukkah be more logical to be kosher? Because these people who built them are Yidden that are obligated in sukkah. So they built it. It was built by a kosher person. Similar to what I was saying about a Sefer Torah Tefillah Mezuzah. It have to be made by someone who's obligated. So these sukkahs were actually made by someone who's obligated in sukkah. He didn't have in mind the sukkah. He had in mind maybe for sale. He had in mind for shade, but he didn't have in mind for sukkah. He had in mind to make money maybe, but his goal is to have a hut that's going to give shade. but that's going to be kosher, and the people who built it are people who are obligated in sukkah. But Tana mikol makom, and the Tana added another case called the mikol makom case, the simple sukkah case. And what was that? That not only are these kosher, but even the mikol makom sukkah, the sukkah that's just like an okay, this sukkah is also going to be kosher. That is la suye ganbach. That includes the sukkah of the ganbach that are much less logically kosher, according to this opinion, the lav b'nei chiyuva ninu, because the people who built these sukkahs are not people who are obligated in a sukkah. So they're building the sukkah, but they're not b'nei chiyuva. They're not people that are chayiv in it. And there's room to think that that should for sure not be kosher. And the answer is that it actually is going to be a kosher sukkah, even though it was made by people that are not obligated. Now, from this Gemara, you basically see that the case of the sukkahs of the sukkah of the kutim that the kutim made, that sukkah is these people from Kuta. We said that they might be kosher gerim, they might not, and our Brisa learns that they're not kosher. They're not, their gerus, their conversion was not a kosher conversion. And the reason why we're assuming that, Taisus brings out, he says, because you see from the Gemara afterwards that it says that these are people who are not obligated in making a sukkah. Now, if their conversion was a kosher sukkah, was a kosher conversion, then the kutim would be obligated. And it all flows. They're talking about goyim, nashim, behema, and then kutim. So if you look at the context, you can tell that we obviously are following the view that the kutim are not gerei tzedek, they're not righteous gerim, but instead they are gerei arayos. We are following the view that they are gerim that converted only because of the lions. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I think in Brachot we talked about them too.
Yeah,
they cannot participate in the blessings.
Yeah, about Zimun, right?
Zimun, right?
Zimun, yeah.
I know that in Israel they build Sukkot by the watermelon fields because it's easy to stop your car and grab a watermelon and go and keep driving,
Interesting.
So, but there is one more thing in Uzbekistan. They had them in the fields of the cotton fields. Because they had such large cotton fields that were like endless.
So the workers
were watching the cotton.
So the workers would have a sukkah there.
Yeah.
Wow. Very nice. But Ezra, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, I heard someone saying something. Okay. So anyway, I guess we're going to stop here. We've concluded 8b. So all right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
You too, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.
Happy Father's Day, to everyone.